Okay, so a few of you submitted projects that sounded fine, except that they were clearly recorded without paying attention to the project tempo. So, in other words, you started recording, you didn't have a click track on, and you just started playing, and so the music itself is more or less in time, but it's not in time with the either it doesn't match the BPMs of the music, do not match the BPMs of the project, or the tempo doesn't match, or both. And so I thought I would use this submission as an example of a piece that sounds just fine, but that doesn't match the time, the tempo, and the time signature of the project. And so why is that a problem? It's not always a problem, but with MIDI particularly, since one of the best things about MIDI is that you can make adjustments, you want to take advantage of things like quantization if you can. And so if you're going to record at a tempo that is completely unrelated to the project, you're not going to be able to use quantization. It's just going to mess things up. So the question is, if you accidentally record without ignoring the tempo, and then you decide that you want to go back and fix it, is it possible? And the answer is yes, but it is a bit of a pain. So I'm going to show you what the process is for that. So first of all, just to prove my point, I'm going to turn on the metronome and let's listen to the music, okay, and see how it relates to the metronome. Yeah, anyway, it's pretty clear that it doesn't. So again, the music itself, if I play without the metronome, has its own tempo. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. And it's more or less consistent throughout, but it was clearly recorded without a click track. So how can we fix this? Here's the thing. So here's where it gets kind of tricky. If I just decide that my tempo is going to be, instead of 120, let's say 80, here's the problem. Here's what happens. If I change the tempo here, what Reaper will do is it'll change the length, because it assumes that I recorded things at the tempo and BPMs that I wanted, and I've just now, after the fact, decided that I want it to be slower. And naturally, if I play something slower, it'll last longer. And similarly, if I play it faster, so say I wanted to play at 240, now it's going to get a lot shorter. So we're basically going to keep chasing our tails if we try to do this, because the grid will never align properly. It'll continue to relate to the music the way that it relates to it at 120, because it'll just shrink the timing. So there are two steps that we have to do here. You may remember we had to do one of those steps when we worked on the scale melody. In this case, because we're using MIDI, we have to do one additional step. So the first thing to do is to select all these items, and I'm going to right click and do source properties. Okay, it's fussing now because it's saying, hey, you do realize you're trying to change something and you've selected multiple items. I'm going to say, I know. So then I'm going to say ignore project tempo, and I'm going to hit apply. Okay, now it's going to ask me the same thing for the next item. I'm going to say apply, and again for the following, the last item, I'm going to say okay, done. Now I'm going to go to project settings, and here where it says time base for items, you have to be in project settings. Choose time, and then again time. So now what's going to happen is I can change this tempo. So now take a look at the duration. It's about 56 seconds. If I change this to 80, the grid moves, but not the items. The items stay in place. It's exactly what we want, okay? So we could sort of guess, we can maybe zoom in, and we can look at the approximate length of a measure. Now there is another small issue, which is that this is not quite starting on the beat. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. So let's select these two items. Make sure your snap enable is off, and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to, wait, we can turn it back on. And then I'm going to turn on ripple editing for the whole thing. And I'm going to push these back so that everything moves back. Okay, we want things to stay aligned. Okay, so now I could sort of take some guesses and say, well, maybe 110, it'll be, and you see that it's already a little bit better. So the tempo needs to be a little bit slower. Actually, before we even do that, let's go back to 120. I'm going to change the time signature because the time signature of the piece is actually 3. So we see that it needs to be a little bit slower, but just exactly how much slower, it's kind of hard to say. Okay, so here's how we're going to do this. Okay, there are a couple ways to do it, but this is, I think, the most elegant way. So I'm going to go to the measure 1, and measure 2, and I'm going to do Shift C, which is another way of saying that I'm inserting a time signature change, tempo time signature marker, which is, we've done this in previous videos. So I'm going to say, okay, leave it at 120. Good, so nothing's changing now. I've just added another time signature here, but it's actually the same as the first one, so nothing's changing. But because we have a marker, what we can do now is do use command, and I suppose on a PC would be control. And while we do that, we can now move this marker, and what Reaper will do is it'll stretch the tempo here to match. We're essentially we're calculating the length of a measure is what we're doing. And you see how it gets real precise. It goes like down to decimals. So it's not just 111 BPMs, it's 111.008, which is pretty amazing. Okay, and so now you might say, okay, now we have the duration, the length of a measure. What does that do for us? Because now here, it still changes. It still doesn't match, but that's because from here on, you're back to 120. So all you have to do now is get rid of the marker. And now, basically, okay, now this isn't going to be perfect because, in fact, I'm going to try something a little bit different. And the reason it's not perfect, it's because the playing is not exactly perfectly in tempo, as you would normally expect a live performance to be. So if I go back here and I continue doing this, I can sort of try to find a tempo that matches a little bit better. But the point is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to the ballpark. So let's say, for instance, this here is a harp. Okay, so I'm gonna actually call it harp, and it's basically the way it sounds is if you solo it, it's basically 1 and 2, 3. That's the music. 2, 3, 1 and 2, 3. So you see that all of these are almost on the beat, but not quite. So this is kind of a perfect candidate for quantization. So if I double click on this now and I open it, because I have the right tempo, or a closer tempo anyway, I can zoom in and kind of see how this is behaving. And I'm going to choose a grid of eighth notes. Why eighth notes? Because this is going to happen on the end of one. If I choose quarter notes, it's going to push it too far off. And then I'm going to select all, which I think I already did, I guess. And then I press the letter Q. Hang on a second. Oh no, I didn't select. Okay, select all, then press the letter Q. And then now I'm choosing position and note end. And I'm going to say use grid. Yes. Oh, sorry, I have something wrong here. This is supposed to be an eighth note. And that's it. Okay, so I'm going to say commit. And good. And then now if I want to, which I don't have to, because in the harp, when you have harp notes, they will last, they're kind of let vibrate. But if you wanted these to be a whole bar long, you could still select them and change the grid to the measure, so that now you can quantize those individually, only the selected notes, so that the length of them is the whole measure, okay? But the point is, even if we didn't go that far, the point is that what we hear now is going to be a lot more precise than what we had before. So I'll take a listen. I'm going to turn on the metronome again and listen to the music. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, and then what happens is occasionally things will get off a little, and that's because Reaper's having to guess. When things get pushed over too much, then Reaper thinks, oh, do you mean, did you mean that it's on the end of 3, or is it on the downbeat of 3? Stuff like that. But that doesn't bother us too much, because we can always, we can fix that, not a problem. We can just splice this. Let me turn on the grid at the 8th note level. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this empty space here. Make sure ripple editing is on. And there. So now I do have to fix that note so that it starts on the beat. And that should have fixed the problem there. Yeah, so if I start back from here. Anyway, so you see the point. Is it a pain? Yes, it absolutely is, because now we're doing this after the fact. Is it the end of the world? No, it's possible to fix it. I would say for a piece like this, it's almost better to start just with notation and then import it from Finale or something like that. But anyway, so this is how you would handle it if you had a big project that you're absolutely desperate to fix, get to realign with the project tempo. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would have been to just keep guessing different tempi until we get to water. Another way to do it is to listen to it while you tap the tempo, because you could do that too. You could play back and then you tap the tempo. Right. Oh, by the way, it is possible to have the tempo slow down gradually. For example, if I start from here, let's say from this moment I add a tempo change, and I'm going to leave it the same, and then I want it to slow down from here all the way to here to 80. Let's say you want to rallentando, you can do that. You can double click here and you can say gradually transition to the next tempo marker, which means that at this point, something like that, you could make it much slower so that it actually creates a more sort of human type of thing, human feel. Okay, now, of course, you don't have to quantize all the notes. You might just go back and adjust a note here and there, but it's just really hard to do if you don't have sort of a ballpark of where you want it to be. And especially if you want to add instruments. So say that now you go, I would like to add a flute part. Well, now you got to worry about how this flute part is going to align with all this other stuff that you have. And so your life will be so much easier if you, of course, assuming you're writing, beat-based music. Of course, if you're writing like, droney, ambient music, maybe you don't want a beat that's precise. But even then, having a sort of a general sense of where things are supposed to fall into place is helpful for sure. So, all right, well, that's that. And I hope this is helpful.